Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another book review. This time we will be going over Procopius's work, The Secret History. I recommend this book. 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. I'm just going to read the back to you. I'll read the cover or the introduction, and then I'll discuss the book proper. I'm shooting from the hip here, so I will just start this off. Procopius was a trusted member of the establishment whose official works glorified the deeds of the emperor Justinian. Yet all the while, the dutiful scribe was working on a book that could never be published during his lifetime. The Secret History, a sustained assault exposing the horrific tyranny and corruption of the emperor's regime. Here Justinian is a demon king, while his wife, Empress Theodora, is a bloodthirsty monster of depravity, and the celebrated general Belisarius is the foolish dupe of his scheming wife, Antonina. Magnificently vitriolic, The Secret History is a work of explosive energy, depicting Holy Byzantium as a hell of murder and misrule. So that about sums this up. Procopius was a historian. You know what? I'll just read this. Procopius was born at Caesarea, the great city built by Herod on the west coast of Palestine. We do not know the date. He was probably AD 500 or a little before. In 527, he was appointed private secretary and legal advisor to Belisarius, whom he accompanied on his first 3 campaigns in Persia, Africa, and Italy. When Belisarius, after capturing Ravenna, was recalled to Byzantium, Procopius went with him, and it is probable that when in the next year Belisarius was again sent to the Eastern Front, his secretary once more accompanied him. But 12 months later, in 542, he was certainly back in the capital, where he witnessed the terrible plague which visited the city. We do not know whether he was with the general during the years of the second campaign in and around Italy, or what he did with his time apart from literary work. During the remaining years of his life, the date of his death is not known, but he may have outlived Justinian. From Procopius's pen, 3 works have come down to us, commonly known as the History of the Wars, the Buildings, and the Secret History. So this sort of gives you a rough outline of, honestly, this entire story. Justinian and Theodora are sort of remembered in our world as these heroic figures, these great heroes. And, they ruled justly. They were these godly people and whatnot, And it's yet another case of the outside looks good, but the inside is rotten to the core. And honestly, I read this book as a result of watching Asha Logos' video on the topic. I suppose I can just link to that video in the description here. I highly recommend it as a companion text to this book review, but I do have to tell you, don't just watch videos on these subjects. You need to pick up the books themselves. You need to do the work. You need to grab your shovel. You need to dig. It's not enough to read someone's thoughts, or hear someone's thoughts, rather, on a topic. You have to do the work. You have to read the lines. You have to ruminate on the text. So, Justinian, if I had to say his major vice, it really sounds like greed. Greed was his major vice. Avarice. The man was, like it said in the introduction, Procopius called him the head of demons. A man who was a demon. And he gives accounts of several times where people witnessed, I'll just say, demonic, supernatural activity around Justinian. Now, I'm a Christian. That doesn't surprise me. Some of you may say that's just, he's giving some invective. He doesn't actually mean those things, being hyperbolic. I'll leave that to you to decide. But what I will appeal to you about is, I just appeal to you to read the text before you decide that. Theodora is basically your feminist, goddess type of character. And I really mean that. It's like some weird form of goddess worship was going on in the empire, which, by the way, that shouldn't be shocking or surprising to any of us, right? These sort of historical patterns play themselves out over and over and over. In fact, the first section in this translation is called The Tyranny of Women. It talks about Antonina, which is Belisarius. This is Justinian's famous general. Belisarius' wife, Antonina. She and Theodora had tons of lovers. They were covering for each other, murdering innocent people. Anyone who was virtuous or just during this time period was in danger from that man. Procopius says that this guy would reform laws continually so that he could legally plunder people. He would give off his wealth to the barbarians. He stopped protecting the native populations to assist essentially the plundering of the Roman people, his own people. I mean, what does that sound like? Are you seeing the picture yet? Are you watching what happens when basically true piety and godliness leaves a nation? It's interesting how this happens. Theodora is not this feminist icon. I mean, she might be. She murdered her son. But the thing is, I just want to read the last part of this book because it sort of sums it up. I didn't come prepared. This is kind of from the hip. So I don't have any of these great passages readied for you. But I basically already told you what this is about. You really should go into the specifics, though. And that video by Asha Logos will he does a better job of this than I could ever. I'm just trying to sell you on reading the book. So the final part, this is so interesting. Let's see, where should I start this? Perhaps I could start. When, however, they were released from all this, the poor wretches would engage in bitter quarrels as to see what had happened to the wealth of the Romans, for some insisted that it was all with the barbarians. Others declared that the emperor kept it locked in a vast array of hideaways. Anyway, whenever Justinian, if he is a man, departs from this life, or, as the chief of demons, sets this mortal life aside, then all those who have the fortune still to be alive will know the truth. Procopius was hiding this truth. In his works, the histories in the buildings, he has a more favorable view. But this work, which by the way has been authenticated, this is Procopius's writings. It shows that he was placating the emperor and Theodora while he was alive. Theodora had secret dungeons. Maybe they weren't so secret, but she had dungeons where she would pretty much do the most barbaric things to people. And I don't mean like exaggerated things, but I'll give you an example. I don't remember his name, but this is in the story. She ties a rope around a man's neck and basically makes it so that he has to stand upright for months at a time. And when he gets released from this dungeon, in the darkness of it, he goes back into the light. His eyes are screwed up. The man goes insane. And I think it says that he dies shortly after. So basically, this guy is never able to fully sleep. Like, that is brutal. I mean, if you've read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago or anything of that nature, you'll realize very quickly that sleep deprivation is one of the most horrific ways to break a man, even if he's got a great constitution. So anyway, I highly, highly recommend you read this book. It shows you that some people in history are hailed as heroes when they should be looked at as villains and monsters and tyrants that they are. Other people who are looked at as tyrants ought to be looked at as heroes. And anyway, it's just a really interesting thing. Really, really great to get the full view of history. That's what this project is. We're not looking at this from the lens of rose-tinted glasses. We're not looking at this from the lens of agendas. We want the truth. We want the truth. And like many things, the truth is in plain sight. Procopius risked his life to give us this work. This is the man who is known as one of the great historians. So you have to ask yourself, you have to contend with the fact that he wrote this. You cannot just wave it away. You can't dismiss this. You don't get that option. You must deal with this book. It's not long. It's 120 pages. I would get the Penguin Classics version. That's what I'm reading here. It's got a nice little chronology to it. map of Rome, index of places, of subjects, and names. It's got everything you need. Highly, highly recommend it. Belisarius, the general, basically gets cucked by his wife. You see what happens to a great man who gets... when you see these sort of roles that God has given people inverted on themselves, because that's, if I had to describe the empire at this point in one word, I would just say inversion. And I mean, you're seeing an inversion today, are you not? Maybe you're not there yet. Well, after reading this book, you'll see a lot of the same patterns. For one instance, the barbarians are crossing the border. And what ends up happening is the Romans are basically abandoned by the soldiers, left to be plundered. And when they finally take matters into their own hands, Justinian appeases the barbarians who took their wives, children, and property, plundered their lands, and he sends his soldiers to basically, in the words of Procopius, beat the ever-living snot out of them. He doesn't, that's not a quote, but that's what he says. And just think of yourself, you know, if you're an American, think of the border. Think about what's happening today. And be brutally honest with yourselves. You know that whole meme about how often do you think about the Roman Empire? I get that this is Byzantium. Doesn't matter. Empire is empire, honestly. And we are certainly living at the end of our empire. I mean, I would argue, yeah, that's not for a book review. Buy the book. Definitely buy this book. Procopius has really interesting prose, a very educated man, and he speaks quite favorably of virtue, of dignity and honor. He's compassionate towards these sort of heretical so-called sects of Christianity that are being brutalized under the pretense of godly virtue by the state. So like the Arians, for instance, he names a bunch of these other sects. And basically their property is getting plundered. And he's doing it under the guise of, as I'd said, of piety. He's like, oh, I'm restoring what's God's. No, this man was double-minded, very two-faced, very much like a Pharisee, as was his wife. These two were in tandem. He says that this is the head of demons. Well, he describes Theodora as I would just call her the whore of Babylon, that kind of figure almost. Anyway, check out this book. It's really informative. It's incredible. And it sheds a lot of light on people's true character and what power does to people, especially unchecked. And especially enlightening when you're looking at empire. Okay, this has gone on 13 minutes. We'll stop it here. You guys have a blessed day.